In the crowded cafeteria, trays clatter and voices tangle until Beckett's shadow falls across Kira's table. His taunts rise above the lunchroom noise, his body edging closer, testing how far he can go. When his hand makes a sudden move toward her side, the line is crossed and Kira's pulse steadies. Surrounded by watching students, she stands and draws a clear boundary. "Do not touch me." Then she answers with calm, controlled self-defense. The noise of the cafeteria was a living thing, forks clinking, trays sliding, voices colliding in 100 small conversations. The air smelled faintly of coffee, baked bread, and the metallic tang of anticipation. At midday, the long room was a mosaic of movement. Tables crowded with bright jackets and patterned shirts, hair dyed in every shade imaginable. It was not just lunch, it was theater, and everyone knew they had a role. Near the center, Kira Holt stood in line with a tray balanced against her hip, eyes scanning the selection of salads. The overhead lights were relentless, casting everything into high definition. She wore a fitted blouse in a deep shade of emerald, its V-shaped neckline drawing a clean, elegant line, and a charcoal skirt that caught the light with every subtle shift of her stance. Her posture was straight, shoulders slightly drawn back, her expression calm but focused. From the far end of the room, Beckett Vance moved with a kind of confidence that pulled attention like gravity. His height made him visible above the clusters of students, his crisp, white shirt catching the glare of the lights, his tie loosely knotted as if to signal he was above the rules that bound everyone else. His gaze was fixed, not on the food, not on his friends, but on her. Phones began to tilt upward. A ripple moved through the crowd, not loud, but unmistakable, as conversations faltered and eyes shifted. A circle was forming without a single person needing to say it. Kira did not see him at first. She was reaching for the tongs, a soft clink as they tapped against the bowl. The hum of the room shifted under her skin, an instinctive warning. She straightened, half turning just as Beckett closed the final steps between them. His shadow fell across her. He leaned in, a breath closer than courtesy allowed, his eyes alight with something calculated. His hand came up, fingers spread. In one swift motion, he swung it toward the side of her hip, a gesture meant for spectacle, for the watching crowd as much as for her. And then, everything stopped. The movement froze mid-air, his palm inches from making contact, the lines of tension visible in his wrist, the satisfied curl at the corner of his mouth. Around them, faces hung in suspension. A girl with her lips parted in shock. A boy biting down on the edge of his knuckle. Another student half smiling as though watching a scene from a play. The overhead lights caught every detail. The gleam of the tiled floor, the glint of a phone lens, the fine edge of shadow under Kira's jaw. A voice entered, steady, measured, belonging entirely to her. "You are probably wondering how I ended up here." 6 weeks earlier, the morning sun over Redwood Valley was soft and deceptively gentle, its pale gold spreading across the neat rows of houses and manicured lawns. The air was cool, holding the scent of pine from the hills beyond town. Kira's car, a modest silver sedan that had seen more than a few years of service, hummed quietly as she steered it up the drive toward the sprawling campus of Redwood Valley High School. The first thing that struck her was the space. Buildings rose in clean lines of brick and glass, their facades framed by fountains and white stone columns. The courtyard was broad enough to feel like a plaza, its paths swept clear, its grass trimmed to perfection. Students moved across it in groups, their conversations easy, their clothes cut from fabrics that spoke of expensive brands and afternoons at exclusive stores. Kira pulled into the staff parking area, her car slotting between a polished black SUV and a gleaming red convertible. For a moment, she sat there with her hands resting lightly on the wheel, taking in the contrast. She breathed in, slow and deliberate. "You can do this," she told herself quietly, the words a habit as much as a conviction. The dashboard clock read just past 8 in the morning. She stepped out, smoothing the front of her blouse, the autumn breeze lifting the ends of her hair. In her shoulder bag, alongside the neat folders of lesson plans, was a photograph. Her father, standing in his Marine uniform, eyes direct, mouth set in that patient half-smile she had known all her life. His voice seemed to travel with her even now. "Violence is the last resort. But when it comes, you must be ready." The front entrance was a set of double glass doors that caught the light, turning it into shifting ribbons across the polished floor inside. The air conditioning was crisp against her skin as she stepped through. The hallway smelled faintly of new paint and lemon polish. Students glanced her way as they passed, some with polite nods, others with whispers too soft to catch but not too soft to feel. At the main office, the secretary led her through to the principal's suite. Mr. Ellison rose from behind his desk, tall and neatly dressed, his handshake firm but brief. "Welcome to Redwood Valley High, Miss Holt. I trust you found the campus without trouble?" "Yes, thank you," she said, her voice steady. He gestured for her to sit. "I reviewed your file, impressive credentials. We are glad to have you, though I should mention." His eyes flicked briefly to the paperwork on his desk. "As a contracted teacher for one academic year, evaluations will be ongoing. We have certain expectations regarding conduct, particularly around conflict management. Our policy is clear: physical intervention is to be avoided unless there is an immediate safety threat." "I understand," Kira replied. He smiled politely, but there was a trace of formality in it, the kind that left no doubt the words were both welcome and warning. By the time she left his office, the first bell was still 15 minutes away. She walked the hall toward room 204, her heels making a muted rhythm against the tile. The door opened to a wide, bright classroom. Sunlight fell across the rows of desks, the walls adorned with historical photographs and framed quotations. Martin Luther King Jr., Maya Angelou, Frederick Douglass. She ran her fingertips lightly across the smooth wood of her desk, then began arranging her notes. Outside, the sound of students arriving grew louder. Voices, footsteps, the occasional burst of laughter. She paused by the window, watching them move in their easy circles, thinking about the weeks ahead. In 6 weeks' time, she would stand in a room full of those same students and feel the air sharpen like glass. She would face Beckett Vance in the crowded cafeteria, and everything she had ever told herself about control, about principle, would be tested in a single, frozen instant. But for now, the only sound was the rustle of paper and the echo of her father's voice in the stillness. Violence is the last resort. The sky over Redwood Valley had turned a shade of clear autumn blue that seemed almost too perfect, as if the morning itself was trying to disguise whatever lay ahead. Sunlight poured across the rooftops and trimmed lawns, glinting off windshields and metal gates, catching in the high branches of oaks that lined the main road toward the school. Kira Holt kept both hands on the steering wheel, the hum of her silver Honda filling the quiet space around her. The engine's low vibration was steady, but not quite smooth. The car had been with her for years, through long commutes and sudden moves, through moments of hope and moments she preferred not to revisit. It was the kind of vehicle you trusted more for its history with you than for its appearance. The GPS had been unnecessary. She had memorized the directions days ago, as if the act of rehearsing the route could prepare her for the far more unpredictable path she was about to walk inside. Ahead, a stone archway framed the entrance to Redwood Valley High School, its name engraved in bold serif letters across the top. Beyond it, the campus spread in a series of immaculate buildings, their facades gleaming under the late morning sun. She eased the car into the main drive, the tires rolling over smooth, well-kept asphalt. On her right, the student drop-off lane was already a slow parade of luxury. Polished black SUVs, sleek sports cars in vibrant reds and blues, even a white sedan so pristine it looked as though it had just been driven from a showroom. Drivers in tailored jackets and dark glasses stepped out to open doors for their children. Girls in designer coats and boys with immaculate haircuts moved toward the main entrance with a kind of inherited certainty. Kira's Honda looked small here, almost fragile, a modest silhouette caught between the reflections of high-gloss paint and chrome. She found a space near the far end of the staff lot, cut the engine, and sat still for a moment. Her breath left her slowly. She could almost hear her pulse in the silence. Her eyes drifted to the rearview mirror, catching her own reflection. The face that looked back at her was composed, framed by the gentle waves of her hair, but she recognized the tension in her jaw, the slight tightness at the corners of her eyes. Beneath the calm surface, there was something restless, an echo of a place and time she had worked hard to leave behind. It had been 18 months since she had walked away from her last teaching job at a public high school 2 towns over. That exit had not been planned. What began as a disagreement over disciplinary measures had escalated into weeks of whispered conversations in hallways, closed-door meetings with administrators, and the cold withdrawal of colleagues who had once been friendly. She had stood her ground, but standing alone had its price. When she finally left, it was without a goodbye gathering, without even an acknowledgement in the staff newsletter. The fear of repeating that kind of ending had followed her here. She carried it the way a sailor carries the memory of a storm, hidden most days, but never forgotten. With deliberate care, she reached for the photo in her bag. Her father's Marine uniform filled the frame, his posture as straight as the flag at his side. The crease of his mouth was not a smile, but not far from it, a sign she had learned meant pride tempered with caution. His voice, as clear in her mind as if he were sitting beside her, spoke the words that had become her compass. Violence is the last resort, but when it comes, you must be ready. Kira opened the door and stepped into the crisp air. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she crossed the lot. Each step carried her past vehicles that gleamed like polished armor, their reflections briefly catching her shape before letting her go. She climbed the short flight of stone steps to the main building, its tall glass doors reflecting the bright sprawl of the campus behind her. Inside, the air conditioning was immediate, a sharp coolness against her skin. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh paper. Students passed by in bursts of motion, their conversations dipping just enough to take in the sight of her before resuming, as if her presence was a piece of news worth sharing but not yet urgent. A receptionist behind a curved desk glanced up with a smile. "You must be Miss Holt. Principal Ellison is expecting you." "Thank you," Kira replied. Her voice was calm, but her heartbeat had quickened. She followed the woman through a short corridor lined with framed photographs of past graduating classes. Smiling faces in neat rows, each year a little different, but all bearing the same stamp of affluence and expectation. The office door stood open, revealing Mr. Ellison behind a large desk of dark wood. He rose as she entered. Tall, with hair just beginning to silver at the temples, he wore a navy suit that seemed to fit as naturally as his own skin. His handshake was firm, measured. "Welcome to Redwood Valley High, Miss Holt," he said. "I hope the drive was manageable." "It was," Kira answered. "Good," he nodded, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "I have reviewed your credentials. Your experience is impressive, and your references speak highly of your commitment to students." He folded his hands on the desk, his tone shifting to something more formal. "As you know, your position is contracted for 1 academic year. We use this time to assess not only instructional skill, but also how a teacher adapts to our environment. This is a community that values stability and discretion. We expect conflicts to be handled with professionalism, and physical intervention is to be avoided unless there is a clear and immediate safety threat. Are we understood?" "Yes, Principal Ellison," Kira replied evenly. "Excellent." He offered a brief, polite smile, then began outlining the administrative details. The staff handbook, the expectations for parent-teacher communication, the emphasis on maintaining the school's reputation. As she listened, Kira felt the weight of each word settling into place. This was not merely another job. It was, in many ways, her last open door. If she lost her footing here, if she allowed herself to be drawn into the kind of confrontation that had cost her before, there would be no easy path back. Her career, and the years she had spent building it, would fracture beyond repair. When the meeting concluded, she stood and shook his hand once more. His grip was as steady as when she arrived, his expression unreadable. In the hallway outside, the sound of the second bell rolled through the building. The day was beginning in earnest. Kira paused for a moment, breathing in the scent of polished floors and distant cafeteria coffee, and let her eyes close just long enough to hear her father's voice again. "Violence is the last resort." Then she opened her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward her classroom, each step deliberate, the stakes of this new beginning as clear to her as the sunlight pouring through the high windows above. The clock on the far wall marked the final moments before the bell. Sunlight poured in through tall windows, angling across the rows of desks like golden lines drawn with deliberate precision. Kira Holt stood at the front of room 204, her fingers resting lightly on the podium, a stack of neatly arranged notes to one side. The air was crisp from the early autumn morning, and the faint scent of new textbooks lingered in the room. This was her first class with the 11th grade history students, the beginning of her civil rights movement unit. She had chosen to start here intentionally, believing that history was not just a list of events, but a living dialogue with the present. The bell rang, and the room began to fill, first in twos and threes, then in small clusters. Students carried their conversations in with them, setting down bags, sliding into seats with the practiced rhythm of those who had long claimed their places. Designer jackets hung over chairbacks, and phones rested on desks like second sets of hands. Kira greeted each student with a measured nod or a brief smile. Her eyes scanned the room, mentally matching faces to the names she had studied the night before. Then she saw him. Beckett Vance entered as if the room belonged to him. He was tall, his stride unhurried, his posture relaxed but intentional, as though he understood the exact effect he had on the space. His shirt was pressed, his tie loose, and his eyes were a pale, cold blue that seemed to take in every detail without ever revealing his own thoughts. He did not go directly to a seat. Instead, he paused beside a desk near the front, occupied by a slender boy in a navy sweater. Beckett's shadow fell over him. "You are in my seat," he said. The boy did not argue. He gathered his books quickly and moved to the back of the room without a word. Beckett slid into the chair, leaned back, and folded his arms across his chest. His gaze lifted to Kira, and a slow, deliberate smile curved at the corner of his mouth. Kira felt the prickle of awareness along her spine, the quiet alertness that came when an interaction carried an unspoken challenge. She steadied her breath and began. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and even. "I am Miss Holt, and I will be guiding you through American history this year. Today, we begin with the Civil Rights Movement, an era that changed not just laws, but the very framework of this country's conscience." She moved through her opening points with care, describing the social climate of the 1950s, the grassroots organizing, the marches that drew thousands into the streets. The room was quiet, save for the soft sound of pens moving across paper. Then Beckett raised his hand, or rather, lifted it halfway before speaking without waiting to be acknowledged. "Why should we care about something that happened over 60 years ago?" His tone was casual, but the question carried an edge. "That was a different time. People have moved on. Things are not like that now." Several heads turned toward him, then toward her. The silence that followed was not empty. It was weighted, expectant. Kira held his gaze. "That is a fair question," she said. "But history is not a museum exhibit. It is not something you lock behind glass and walk away from. It lives in the decisions we make, in the systems we uphold, in the way we treat one another. If we do not understand the struggles of the past, we risk repeating them, sometimes in ways that are quieter but no less harmful." And Beckett tilted his head slightly, his smile returning, not in agreement, but in recognition that she had met his question without flinching. "So you think we are all just one step away from the 1960s? He asked. "I think," Kira replied, "that the distance between then and now is not measured in years, but in the choices we make every day." A few students shifted in their seats, their expressions sharpening with interest. One girl in the second row nodded almost imperceptibly. Another leaned forward, pen poised, as if the exchange had turned the air in the room electric. Beckett did not press further. He leaned back, his eyes still on her, but the challenge in them had softened into something more appraising. The remainder of the class moved forward, but the undercurrent remained. She could feel it in the way he occasionally tapped his fingers against the desk, in the way his gaze lingered not on the lesson but on her. When the bell rang, students rose in a sudden flurry of movement. Backpacks were hoisted, conversations restarted, phones lit up with new notifications. Beckett was the last to leave, his chair scraping softly against the floor. As he passed her, he offered a quiet, almost friendly, "Interesting class, Miss Holt," before stepping into the hallway. The room was empty within moments, but the echo of that first clash stayed with her. She knew instinctively that this would not be their last exchange. That afternoon, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Kira approached her car, her mind still replaying the class in fragments, the measured tone she had chosen, the stillness she had maintained, the flicker of respect she thought she saw in a few students' eyes. From a distance, her Honda looked just as she had left it. But as she drew nearer, she noticed the slight tilt in its stance, the way the front end seemed to sink ever so slightly toward the asphalt. A knot formed in her chest. She crouched beside the front driver's side wheel. The tire was not slashed, no jagged tear, no obvious damage. Instead, it was simply flat. The air let out with patient precision. She checked the other three, all the same. Around her, the lot was quiet, except for the distant echo of a bouncing basketball from the gym. She straightened slowly, scanning the expanse of parked cars. No one lingered, yet she felt the distinct sensation of being observed, as if the stillness itself was watching her. It could have been anyone, she told herself. A coincidence, a prank unrelated to the events of the morning, but the thought rang hollow. The timing was too neat, the message too pointed. A maintenance worker in a faded cap approached, carrying a portable air compressor. "Need some help, ma'am?" he asked. She nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thank you." As he knelt beside the first wheel, he shook his head. "Happens sometimes. New teachers, especially. Kind of an initiation, though I reckon it is not a friendly one." Kira watched him work, the hum of the compressor filling the silence. She thought of Beckett's eyes in the classroom, cool, unwavering, amused. She thought of the ease with which he had displaced another student, the way the room had followed his lead without a single word. By the time the tires were full again, the sky had deepened into amber and violet. She thanked the worker, got into her car, and closed the door. For a long moment, she sat in the driver's seat, her hands resting on the wheel, her mind tracing the thin, invisible line between a first encounter and the beginnings of a conflict. She knew that line could vanish quickly, and when it did, the space between them would become something far more dangerous. The following morning began with a brittle clarity, as if the light itself had sharpened overnight. Redwood Valley High stood beneath a pale sky, the air cool enough to hold the scent of damp grass. Kira Holt walked through the main doors with her lesson plans tucked beneath her arm, ready to begin another day. She had not yet reached her classroom when she noticed a shift in the atmosphere, small but tangible. In the hall, students glanced up from their phones and looked her way. Some whispered, others stifled faint smiles, their eyes flicking down toward their screens and back to her. The quiet was threaded with something that was not curiosity alone. At her desk, she powered on her computer and opened her email. There was nothing unusual in her inbox, but when she unlocked her phone to check the time, a notification from a teacher's group chat caught her eye. The message was brief. "You should see what the students are posting." The link led to a student-run social media account. There, on the screen, was an image she recognized instantly, herself, in the hallway outside room 204 the day before. She was bending to retrieve a stack of papers that had slipped from her bag, the motion caught at an angle from behind. Above the image was a caption written in bold letters, the words cruel in their precision and unmistakably laced with racial contempt. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. The photo was framed to diminish her, to turn an ordinary gesture into something to be mocked. The caption made it worse, reducing her presence, her work, her authority to a stereotype. Her first impulse was to close the screen and move on, but a deeper instinct overruled it. This was not a passing insult. It was deliberate. It was meant to spread. She rose from her desk and made her way to the main office. The secretary ushered her into Principal Ellison's office without delay. He listened as she described the post, then accepted her phone when she held it out. His eyes moved over the image, his expression tightening in the faintest degree. "That is unfortunate," he said finally, setting the phone down. "These things have a way of burning out if we do not give them oxygen." Kira leaned forward slightly. "The caption is explicitly offensive. This is not a harmless joke. It undermines my position in the classroom." Ellison folded his hands, his tone even. "I understand your concern. I will speak to the student council about responsible online behavior. In the meantime," he hesitated, as if choosing his words, "you may want to consider dressing in a way that leaves less room for misinterpretation. It could help avoid similar situations." The words landed like a weight. For a moment, she was back in the meeting room of her last school, hearing the same kind of deflection, a suggestion that the problem was her presence, not the behavior of others. "I dress professionally," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "I am merely suggesting we control what we can control." She thanked him, though the gesture felt hollow, and returned to her classroom. When she closed the door, the silence pressed in. She reached for a legal pad and began to write. Date, time, description of the incident, the principal's response. She numbered the page, 1, and underlined it. From that moment, she would record everything. Every whisper that stopped when she entered a room. Every sudden hush in the hall. Every incident, no matter how small, She would keep the record not just for herself, but for the truth that memory alone could not always protect. The day unfolded in its usual rhythm, though the undercurrent of scrutiny was stronger now. She kept her composure through each class, her tone measured, her posture steady. But by the time the last bell rang, she was ready for the quiet of her office. Room 204 was on the second floor, at the far end of the west wing. The corridor was nearly empty when she stepped out, carrying a stack of graded assignments. The door to the small teacher's office was just ahead, its glass panel catching the late afternoon light. She reached for the handle, only to find her way blocked. Beckett Vance stood in the doorway. His shoulder rested lightly against the frame, one hand in his pocket, the other braced on the door jamb. He was not smiling, but there was a trace of amusement in his eyes, as if this moment were a private game. "Excuse me," Kira said evenly. He did not move. "You know, you walk very quickly, almost like you do not want anyone to catch you." She kept her voice calm. "I need to get inside." "Of course you do." He tilted his head, the movement slow, deliberate. "But maybe you and I should have a conversation first." Her father's voice rose in her mind. "Stay calm. Assess. Never show fear." "This is not the place for that," she said, her tone cooling. He stepped a fraction closer, enough to narrow the space between them. "Then tell me where is." Before she could answer, a voice called from down the hall. "Mr. Vance." Harlow Bennett stood several yards away, a phone in her hand. She was a slight figure with sharp eyes, the kind that missed nothing. She lowered the phone slowly, as if she had just completed something important. Beckett glanced over his shoulder, the faintest flicker of irritation crossing his face. He stepped back, letting his arm fall to his side. "Another time, miss?" "Holt," he said, and walked away without looking back. Kira unlocked the door and stepped inside, closing it firmly behind her. Only then did she let out the breath she had been holding. Her pulse was steadying, but the knowledge settled hard in her chest. The line between provocation and action had narrowed, and someone else had now seen it. She did not know yet why Harlow had been there, or what exactly her phone had captured. But she knew this. The first incident was no longer hers alone to bear. It was on record, in more ways than one. The late afternoon light slanted low through the tall windows of room 204, turning the dust motes into flecks of gold. The final bell had rung nearly half an hour ago. The hallways outside were quiet except for the distant, rhythmic thump of a basketball from the gym. Kira Holt was at her desk, finishing the last of the day's grading, when a soft knock sounded against the doorframe. She looked up. Harlow Bennett stood in the doorway, a satchel slung over one shoulder, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. Her eyes were steady but guarded, as though she had been rehearsing something on the way here and was not certain how to begin. "Do you have a minute?" Harlow asked. Kira set her pen down. "Of course. Come in." The girl stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She did not immediately sit, instead moving to stand near the row of windows, her back to the fading light. "I recorded what happened yesterday," Harlow said. Her voice was quiet, but there was no uncertainty in it. "When Beckett blocked your way into the office, I thought you should know." Kira felt the words settle between them like a stone in still water. "You were in the hallway?" Harlow nodded. "I was on my way to the library. I saw him standing there, and I knew it was not casual. So I filmed it. I have the clip on my phone." She hesitated, glancing down at her hands. "This is not the first time. With you, I mean. He has done this to others. My freshman year, he cornered me outside the gym, told me things I will not repeat. I never reported it. I did not think anyone would believe me." The words carried no tremor, but Kira could hear the memory in them. The weight of an incident carried too long without acknowledgement. "Why now?" Kira asked gently. Harlow met her gaze. "Because you are not pretending it did not happen. You did not laugh it off or make yourself smaller. And if I give you this, maybe it will not be just my word anymore. Maybe it will mean something." Kira gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Sit down. Show me what you have." Harlow lowered herself into the chair and unlocked her phone. The screen lit her face in the dimming room. She tapped a file, and the video began to play. Beckett in the doorway, his arm braced against the frame, his posture a wall. Kira's voice, calm but firm, asking him to move. His reply, casual on the surface, but laced with possession. The clip ended as he stepped aside, glancing toward Harlow's camera without recognition. "It is clear," Kira said. "There is more," Harlow replied. She opened a folder in her gallery. Screenshots, messages to other girls, comments on their photos. He deletes them fast, but sometimes people forward them to me. I save everything. Kira scrolled through the images. Snatches of conversations, timestamps, usernames. Some were blunt in their intent. Others hid behind the kind of coded language meant to escape notice. "You have been keeping these for a while," Kira observed. Harlow nodded. "I thought maybe one day someone would listen." The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the building's ventilation. Kira felt a steadying resolve settle over her. This was no longer about an isolated encounter. It was a pattern, and now there was proof. "We will need to be careful," Kira said at last. "If we move too fast, he will bury it before anyone sees. We gather what we can, video, messages, witnesses willing to speak. I can talk to a few people," Harlow offered. "They will not go to the principal, but they might talk to you." Kira nodded. "Do it quietly. If anyone asks, you are working on a class project." And Harlow, "Thank you. It takes courage to keep what you kept, and more to hand it over." The girl's shoulders eased, just slightly. "I just do not want him to do to someone else what he did to me." When Harlow left, the hallway was already darkening toward evening. Kira locked the classroom door, gathered her bag, and stepped into the cool air outside. She walked to her car, the campus nearly deserted now, the sound of her heels echoing against the pavement. She drove in silence until she reached the quiet of her small apartment. The walls held the day's shadows, the air carrying the faint scent of chamomile from the tea she had left unfinished that morning. She set her bag down and reached for her phone. The number was one she knew by heart. She listened to the steady ring until the line clicked, and her father's voice came through, warm but edged with alertness. "Kira?" "Hi, Dad," she said, sinking into the armchair by the window. "I needed to hear your voice." "Something happened," he said, not as a question. She told him everything. Beckett, in the doorway, the video, Harlow's confession, the folder of saved messages. She did not raise her voice, but the recounting left her pulse heavy in her chest. When she finished, there was a pause on the line. Then her father spoke, his tone measured. "You are walking into something that has been built over time, brick by brick. Do not think one strike will bring it down. And remember, violence is the last resort, always. You understand me?" "I do," she said quietly. "It means you keep your mind clear, your steps deliberate. If you let him provoke you, you lose the ground you have gained. You do not let him set the terms." Kira looked out the window at the fading sky. "What if the ground keeps shifting?" "Then you anchor yourself," he replied, "with what you know is right, with proof, with allies who will stand when you do." End 5. She closed her eyes for a moment, holding his words like a weight in her hands, solid, grounding. "I am not looking for a fight, Dad. I know, but be ready if one comes." After they said goodnight, Kira sat for a long time in the quiet. The city lights were beginning to bloom beyond her window, small points of gold against the deepening blue. On her desk, the folder Harlow had sent waited to be opened again. The evidence was there, raw, undeniable. She knew the days ahead would not be simple. But for the first time since stepping into this school, she felt the faint but certain shift of balance. She was no longer alone in this. Somewhere between the shadows and the light, an ally had stepped forward, and that changed everything. The first break in the storm came on a Wednesday morning. It was the kind of day where the light through the classroom windows looked almost forgiving, soft, golden, and without edges. For 3 days after the confrontation, Beckett sat in the back row like a shadow pressed against the wall. No interruptions, no mocking smirks, no whispered jokes to his friends. His eyes stayed fixed on his desk, the tip of his pen tapping quietly on a spiral notebook. To Kira, it felt like breathing for the first time in weeks. She could walk into her own classroom without the dull, constant drumbeat of anticipating his next move. The lesson plans finally had room to breathe too, her students leaning in toward the whiteboard, asking real questions, answering with unguarded voices. She taught with the kind of ease she had almost forgotten. Her hands moved freely, sketching diagrams, underlining key points, tracing arcs in the air as if she could shape the learning right there between her fingers. Even the air seemed lighter. During lunch in the staff lounge, She caught herself smiling at a comment from Miss Harper about the new science lab. The laughter was brief, but it startled her because she could not remember the last time it had risen in her throat without effort. Her focus began to shift toward the paperwork for her contract renewal. The district required a thick packet: student progress charts, professional development certificates, recommendations from the department chair. In the evenings, she stayed late, the empty halls echoing with the hum of vending machines and the far-off sound of the custodian's radio. Her laptop screen cast a pale light on her desk as she sorted through evidence of her work, carefully building the case for why she should stay. For the first time in months, the horizon seemed steady. But steadiness, she would soon learn, can be the cruelest disguise of all. On the fourth morning, just after the first bell, the mood shifted. It was not loud at first, more like a ripple moving through still water. A few students were bent over their phones, their shoulders hunched in that particular way that meant they were hiding something. A faint murmur spread from desk to desk, a chain of suppressed laughter and sharp intakes of breath. Kira paused mid-sentence during roll call, her pen hovering over the attendance sheet. "Is there something the class would like to share?" she asked, keeping her voice even. No one answered, but she could feel the air tightening, pulling inward. It was not fear yet. It was anticipation. The answer came during second period. A student named Lila slid into the room late, her phone still glowing in her hand. She dropped it into her lap without looking up, but not before Kira caught a glimpse of what was on the screen. A black background, white, blocky letters, and in the center, a digital clock face, counting backward. 23 hours, 48 minutes, 11 seconds. Below it, in smaller red text, just two words: D. Day. There was no signature, but there did not need to be. The image pulsed with the kind of bravado only one person in this building would dare broadcast. By lunch, the story had spread beyond her classroom, beyond her grade level, beyond anything she could contain. It was on phones in the cafeteria, whispered over trays of fries, replayed in bathroom stalls, dissected in hallways like a prophecy. Teachers in the lounge glanced at her when they thought she was not looking. Conversations hushed as she entered. Somewhere deep in the building, a vending machine dropped a can, the metallic clatter unnervingly loud. She told herself it was just another game, another attempt to bait her into a reaction. But her pulse betrayed her. Beneath her calm expression, her mind was already calculating. 23 hours from what? What would Beckett choose for his so-called D-Day, and why the countdown for the whole school to see? In her third period class, she noticed Beckett for the first time that day. He sat not at the back, but dead center, as if he wanted her to feel the weight of his presence. His arms were crossed loosely over his chest, his head tilted just enough to convey patience, a predator's patience. When the bell rang, he was the last to leave. He passed by her desk with the faintest trace of a smile, almost imperceptible, but just enough to confirm what she already knew. The story was his. The clock was ticking, and she was meant to hear every second of it. By the final bell, the atmosphere in the school had shifted into something electric and unstable. Students clustered in tight groups, their voices dropping when she walked by. Some wore looks of excitement, others of pity. That evening, Kira stayed in her classroom long after the corridors had emptied. The sky outside the windows was painted in the heavy blue of early winter dusk. She spread her renewal forms across the desk, but the words swam on the page. Her pen hovered over the first signature line, then retreated. In her mind, the countdown clock replayed endlessly. The numbers falling, second by second, an invisible heartbeat that pulsed in her chest. She thought about ignoring it, refusing to feed whatever spectacle Beckett had planned. But in her gut, a deep unease twisted tighter with each passing moment. She had seen enough in her short time here to know that some threats were not empty. Some were announcements. The only sound in the room was the tick of the old wall clock above the door. It was almost cruel how ordinary that sound was compared to the silent countdown happening across hundreds of screens in this building. When she finally stood to leave, the halls were so quiet that her own footsteps sounded too loud. She locked her classroom door with deliberate care, her eyes scanning the shadows between the lockers. Outside, the cold air caught in her throat. She made it to her car, her breath forming pale ghosts in the night, and sat there for a moment with the engine off. The faint light of her dashboard clock read 7:20 in the evening. In less than a day, Beckett's D-Day would arrive. She turned the key, but her hands stayed on the steering wheel, motionless. Somewhere between the quiet and the cold, she realized the truth. The calm she had been clinging to was never real. It was only the pause before the strike. And whatever Beckett had planned, it was already in motion. The countdown moved like a second heartbeat through the school. It lived on screens, in whispers, in the way students leaned toward one another, as if the future could be heard if one pressed close enough. By nightfall, the air above Redwood Valley High felt charged, as if a storm waited just beyond the hills, patient and certain. Kira Holt did not sleep. She lay in the thin darkness of her apartment and listened to the slow breath of the rooms, the hush of traffic far away, the quiet tick of a kitchen clock counting down a parallel life. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the stark face of the digital timer and the words beneath it, as blunt as a stone, D-Day. When the first faint band of light lifted the edge of the blinds, she rose. The old training studio sat at the far end of a strip of small shops 3 streets from the river. Its door was unmarked except for a narrow pane of frosted glass. Inside, the space smelled of canvas and clean dust, of old effort and discipline. The floor mats were a patchwork of blues and grays, worn smooth by years of practice. A wall of mirrors held the pale early light, doubling the room into a quiet, watchful cathedral. She set her bag down and stood barefoot on the mat. For a moment, she did nothing at all. She let the room breathe around her. She let the memory of her father's voice arrive and settle in the center of her chest. Violence is the last resort, but when it comes, you must be ready. She drew a line down the center of the mat with her eyes. On one side, the words that had held her steady. Teacher, order, history, patience. On the other, the words that had been forced upon her. Bait, spectacle, threat, countdown. She stepped into her stance, knees soft, chin slightly tucked, shoulders relaxed. She breathed in for 4 counts, out for 4 counts, until the world became the simple rhythm of breath and ground. Stop. Do not touch me. She spoke the words aloud, not loud, but steady. She let them fill the room. She imagined his shape closing, imagined the weight of another person entering her space without consent. She lifted her hands, not as fists, but like open gates that could shut when needed. She framed the space in front of her shoulder, a barrier without hostility. Again. Stop. Do not touch me. She drilled the first sequence. The verbal boundary paired with a small step to the diagonal, 45 degrees off the line of approach, just enough to steal the center. She practiced the redirect, palm brushing at the attacker's forearm with a firm, angled sweep, not pushing hard, only changing the line. She felt the movement as geometry, as ethics translated into shape, minimum force, maximum clarity. She repeated it, slow to fast. Voice, frame, redirect, breath. Only when the movement flowed without thought did she layer the next beat. From the redirect, she drew her knee through and sent a short side kick to the target zone. Hip or mid-thigh, a place designed for balance, not damage. The kick was compact, not a flourish, the heel shaping a brief, precise connection. She imagined the result she wanted, not pain, but distance. A stumble. A second to leave. She added the exit. Kick, step back, angle off, eyes up, path clear. Call for help, she said aloud to herself, as if instructing a class. Move to people, move to light. Time loosened. The mirror gave her a partner who matched her breath for breath, her hair damp at the temples, her blouse sleeves pushed to the elbow. She learned again what her body had known for years, that preparation is not bravado. It is the quiet refusal to be helpless. Between sequences, she walked the edges of the mat and drank water, the coolness bright on her tongue. She thought of the students whose faces had sharpened when she spoke of history as a living thing. She thought of Harlow with her careful voice and her folder of proof. The room felt like a promise she was making to them as much as to herself. I will meet force with boundaries, and only if those boundaries are broken will I step beyond words. Near mid-morning, the door opened with a soft mechanical click. Officer Maya Clark stepped inside, the studio's light catching on the brass edge of her badge before she tucked it beneath her jacket. She carried a seriousness the way some people carry grace. It arrived first, and then the person followed. I tried the front desk. The owner said you might be here, Maya said. Do you have a minute? Kira nodded and gestured to the bench by the wall. She wrapped a towel around her neck and joined her. I saw the story, Maya said without preamble. Or rather, I saw what the story has turned the school into, a rumor dressed as a clock. Her mouth tightened, then softened. I wish I could tell you it is only noise. What can you tell me? Kira asked. Maya folded her hands. There have been incidents involving the Vance family before, here and in neighboring districts. Reports made, witnesses found. And then, in the space between a complaint and a consequence, things fall apart, files get lost, statements are withdrawn. People change their minds. If you ask why, you hear the same explanation given 6 different ways. Pressure, embarrassment, fear, the simple desire to return to ordinary life. Silence gathered around the words. The clock on the far wall ticked once, a clean sound in a clean room. So you are telling me to expect nothing, Kira said. The sentence held neither bitterness nor surrender. It was an inquiry that knew its answer. I am telling you to expect the ground to shift under your feet, Maya replied. But I am also telling you how to stand when it does. Keep your record. Keep your allies close. If a student brings you evidence, preserve the original files, store copies in 2 places, and send a time-stamped email to yourself describing what you received and when. If you are threatened, report it formally and immediately. Ask for an escort when you leave the building after dark. Walk where there is light. Do not be alone in closed spaces with him. Kira felt the discipline of the morning settle into her bones in a new form. Breath and geometry, now written as policy and chain of custody. Ethics in motion, ethics on paper. I will do all of it, she said. Maya regarded her for a moment. You remind me of a teacher I had in middle school, she said. She did not raise her voice. She simply never looked away. That was how we learned that we could look too. She stood. I will be on campus tomorrow, not to escalate, to watch. After Maya left, the room felt larger and more precise, as if her words had squared the corners. Kira returned to the center of the mat and began again. Voice, frame, redirect, side kick to hip or thigh, exit. She paired each motion with a sentence that would carry in a crowd but would not invite a fight. Step back. You are too close. Do not touch me. I am leaving now. Near noon, her phone vibrated on the bench. The name on the screen pulled her forward. Harlow. A single line of text appeared above a thumbnail of video. I think you should see this. Kira tapped the clip open. The camera angle was low and a little shaky, as if filmed from across a hallway through the opening between stacks of books. The corridor in the frame was one she knew, a side wing near the music rooms where the light fell in narrow strips. Beckett stood with 2 boys, his back half turned to the lens, his voice clear enough to lift the hair along Kira's arms. Tomorrow, he said, each syllable slow. Tomorrow, everyone will see her kneel. There was a pause, and the boy to his left said something that did not register. Beckett's answer came with a softness that felt colder than a shout. I said what I said. Someone passed in front of the lens, and the clip ended. Kira watched it a second time, then a third, until her breath had slowed enough to let thought form again. She forwarded the clip to her personal email and to a cloud folder she had created the night before. She typed the date, the time written out in words, the location implied by the echoes in the hall. She noted that the file had come from Harlow and that she had viewed it without sharing it with any student. She attached the notes to the email and sent it to herself. For a long moment, she stood with the phone in her hand and looked at her reflection in the mirror. She did not look like a warrior. She did not look like a victim. She looked like a teacher who had stepped into a story that was being written around her and who had decided to write her part on purpose. She put her shoes back on and zipped her bag. The studio door closed behind her with a gentle latch. Outside, the day had grown bright and brittle. The sun made hard edges of everything. The curb, the windows, the thin winter trees. She drove to the school, parked near the back entrance, and walked the halls with a clarity that felt almost like quiet. In her classroom, she wrote the afternoon's objectives on the board with deliberate strokes. She checked the sightlines of the room, the positions of the desks, the path to the door. She adjusted nothing. She adjusted herself. Calm is not an accident, she thought. Calm is a decision one makes before it is required. When the final bell released the day, she waited until the building had thinned to its evening bones. Then she gathered her renewal packet from the drawer and slid it into her briefcase. The pages felt heavier than paper. They felt like a life she was still choosing. On her way out, the hallway lights hummed softly. At the far end, a janitor's cart stood beside a closed door. Somewhere a piano sounded two cautious notes, as if a student in the music room was asking permission to continue. Kira paused and looked down the length of the corridor. She imagined a clock she could not see, lowering its numbers one by one. Outside, the sky had begun to turn. A pale rose at the horizon, a deepening blue above. She called her father and let his voice lay a steady hand on her shoulder across the distance. He did not tell her to be brave. He reminded her of what she already was. "Violence is the last resort," he said. "I know," she answered. "I am practicing the parts that come before." She drove home with both hands on the wheel and both eyes facing forward. On her kitchen counter, she set her bag down and laid out what tomorrow would require. Lesson plan, charged phone, a printed copy of the school's code on physical intervention, a list of names of teachers who could stand at her side if asked. She filled a bottle with water and placed it beside her keys. Before bed, she stood in the quiet of the living room and spoke her 3 sentences into the room. Not loud, but certain. "Step back. You are too close. Do not touch me. I am leaving now." Outside, the city drew its lights up from the ground. Somewhere on 100 small screens, the numbers fell. 10 hours, then 9, then 8. Kira lay down and fixed her gaze on the line where ceiling met wall. Calm would not come to her. She would go to it. And when the clock reached its end, she would be ready. The scent of reheated pizza and overboiled broccoli lingered in the air, mixing with the constant clatter of trays and the low roar of teenage conversation. On most days, the cafeteria was noisy but ordinary. Today, it was a stage. Every table, every bench, every flickering light above seemed charged with anticipation, as if the walls themselves knew something was about to happen. Kira stepped into the room, her lunch tray balanced neatly in both hands. She had trained herself to walk steadily, her shoulders level, eyes forward, ignoring the whispers that followed her like shadows in these halls. The chatter in the room dipped briefly when she appeared, then rose again, this time with a different energy. She could feel it ripple through the crowd. Phones were lifted discreetly, camera lenses glinting under the fluorescent lights. Someone muttered to a friend, and the friend's mouth curled into a grin. She scanned for an open spot, her gaze resting for a moment on the far corner, where a few quiet students sat. That was her intended path. But then a figure stepped into her line of sight, deliberately blocking the way. Beckett. His broad frame and swaggering stride seemed designed to fill as much space as possible, each movement announcing ownership of the room. His friends, half lounging at a nearby table, straightened with a kind of expectant glee. Kira's heartbeat quickened, not out of fear, but out of the sharp, controlled awareness she had honed through years of martial arts discipline. She set her tray down on the nearest table, freeing her hands. Beckett closed the distance between them in 3 measured steps. The noise of the cafeteria softened in her perception, replaced by the slow pound of her pulse and the faint hum of the overhead lights. He stopped close, too close. The students nearby leaned forward, phones held a little higher, live stream icons glowing faintly. His voice was low, but sharp enough to carry. "Thought you could walk in here and pretend you belong?" His words dripped with contempt, but it was not the words that made the air tighten. It was the intention behind them. Kira kept her chin level, her voice calm and deliberate. "You are standing in my way. Move aside." He tilted his head slightly, as if amused, then let his hand sweep forward, not to strike her face, but to deliver a sharp, disrespectful slap to the side of her torso. The sound was small, almost lost in the clamor of the cafeteria, but the meaning was loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd reacted with a collective intake of breath. Pain flared briefly where his palm had made contact, but Kira's training told her pain was secondary to control. She took one precise step back, placing space between them, and raised her voice just enough for clarity. "Do not touch me again." Her words were not shouted. They were edged with the steady steel of a boundary clearly drawn. For a moment, she thought he might step back, that perhaps the weight of so many watching eyes would hold him in check. Instead, Beckett advanced, his grin widening, closing the distance she had just created. The air seemed to condense around them. Her stance shifted subtly, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced, one hand slightly raised. His arm moved again, a careless, forward-driving motion meant to intimidate. In a single smooth sequence, she brought her left arm up, sweeping his reaching hand aside with a firm parry. At the same moment, her right leg pivoted and extended in a clean arc. Her side kick connected squarely with his hip, the impact resonating through her core. The force sent him stumbling sideways, his balance collapsing beneath him. Beckett's shoulder clipped the edge of a table. Trays clattered, a carton of milk tipped over, and a group of students scrambled back in startled motion. His knee struck the leg of a bench, and he lurched to catch himself, failing to fully regain his footing before collapsing into a chair that skidded an inch across the floor. For the briefest instant, silence reigned. Even the hum of the vending machine seemed muted. The entire cafeteria stared, phones frozen midstream, recording the moment that tension tipped into action. Kira did not advance. She did not gloat or add a word to the outcome. Instead, she stepped back until the cool edge of a pillar was at her shoulder, her breathing steady, her eyes fixed on the nearest staff member. "Call security," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the charged quiet. Her words seemed to release the room from its stunned pause. Voices surged again, gasps, hurried whispers, the clatter of someone dropping a fork. A few students lowered their phones, while others tilted them to capture Beckett's unsteady effort to stand. The livestream comment feeds would already be filling with fire emoji chains, shocked faces, and hastily typed captions. Kira kept her gaze forward, her stance measured. She knew from training that victory was not in the strike, but in the space that followed. It was in not allowing triumph to become recklessness. Across the room, a staff member began moving toward her, expression tense and uncertain. She could hear the squeak of their shoes against the linoleum, mingling with the distant sound of someone dialing on a school phone. Her mind cataloged every detail, the shallow rise and fall of Beckett's chest as he recovered his breath, the narrowing of his eyes not in pain but in wounded pride, the shifting weight of his friends as they hesitated between coming to his side or staying seated to avoid involvement. She could feel the eyes on her, some admiring, some hostile, most merely curious, but she gave none of them her attention. Beckett straightened slowly, one hand on the table for balance. He did not approach again. Whether it was the presence of so many recording phones or the echo of her kick still resonating through his ribs, he stopped where he was. Their gazes met for a fraction of a second. A silent exchange in which nothing more needed to be said. A second staff member entered, speaking quietly into a radio clip to their belt. The crowd shifted again, sensing the scene was drawing to its inevitable close. Kira adjusted her footing, grounding herself one final time before she let her gaze sweep toward the exit. She had no intention of walking out alone into whatever chaos awaited beyond the cafeteria doors. Not without a clear path. She did not know if the recording would be shared beyond these walls, or if it would become another piece of evidence in the long chain of moments that defined her time here. She only knew that she had defended her boundary with precision, that she had done so without excess, and that she had made her intentions clear before acting. The first staff member reached her side. "Security is on their way," they said, their voice low. Kira nodded once. She did not lower her guard, but she allowed her breathing to deepen. The adrenaline was beginning to ebb, leaving behind the cool clarity of aftermath. From somewhere behind her, a chair scraped, followed by the muffled thump of a phone slipping into a pocket. The scent of spilt milk hung in the air, mixing with the sharper tang of tension not yet fully dissolved. She glanced one last time at Beckett. He was upright now, but still leaning slightly to one side, his hand pressed discreetly against his hip. Their eyes did not meet this time. The heavy doors at the far end of the cafeteria swung open, and the dark uniforms of the security team appeared in the doorway. The crowd's noise swelled briefly, then softened again as if yielding the floor to a new set of actors. Kira stepped back fully, letting the staff take position between her and Beckett. Her part in this confrontation was over. The rest would be handled by process, however flawed that process might be. The hallway felt like a tunnel, the air thick with a mix of sweat, dust, and the sharp tang of fear. Students pressed themselves against the lockers, their faces a mosaic of shock, curiosity, and the thrill of gossip in real time. Every pair of eyes followed Harlow as she stood in the center, her phone clutched in both hands. Her breathing was steady, but her knuckles were white against the metal case. Security Officer Ramirez was the first to arrive, pushing through the cluster of students with deliberate force. His uniform was crisp, the badge glinting under the harsh fluorescent light, but his eyes carried the fatigue of someone who had seen too many hallway confrontations. Behind him came Miss Langford, the chemistry teacher, still in her lab coat, smelling faintly of acetone. Her heels clicked against the tiles, each step sharp as a metronome counting down to something irreversible. "What is going on here?" Ramirez demanded, his voice filling the space. His gaze darted from Harlow to Beckett, whose stance was wide and aggressive, chin lifted in challenge. Without a word, Harlow tapped her phone screen. A soft chime announced the opening of a video file, and then the sound began to spill into the hallway. It was not just one clip. She had arranged them in sequence, months of moments stitched together like a case file in motion. The first video showed a corner of the cafeteria. The camera, shaky but focused, captured Beckett and his friends, blocking a freshman from leaving the table. Their voices were sharp, cruel. The freshman's shoulders caved in as if trying to disappear. The second clip jumped to the locker row near the gym. Beckett's hand slammed into a locker door just inches from another student's head. The metallic crash made several in the crowd flinch even now, though they knew it was only a recording. Clip after clip, the pattern emerged. Different days, different victims, the same escalation. Snickers layered over threats, shoves delivered when no teacher was in sight, a deliberate choreography of intimidation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The footage was unflinching, the kind of proof that gnawed through denial like acid. Beckett's jaw tightened. "This is out of context," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. He pointed at Harlow as though his finger could tear the truth from the air. "She is twisting this." But the next clip cut him off before he could finish. This one was longer, almost a minute in length. It showed Harlow herself in the library corner, her back to the shelves as Beckett leaned in, his voice low but laced with threat. Even with the muffled audio, the words were clear enough. "You will regret it if you speak." Gasps rose from the students. One girl covered her mouth. Even Ramirez's eyes darkened with recognition of what he was hearing. Out of context? Miss Langford's voice was calm, but the tremor beneath it betrayed her anger. "These are dates and times across the school year, Mr. Beckett. Do you want to explain all of them?" Beckett's mouth opened, then closed. His hands curled into fists, and for a heartbeat, it looked as though he might lunge forward. But the space between him and Harlow was guarded now, not just by Ramirez, but by the silent, collective weight of witnesses. The final clip began to play, and it was the most damning. It had been recorded in the stairwell 2 weeks ago. Beckett stood with two others, cornering a sophomore boy against the railing. One of them tipped a bottle of water over the boy's backpack. The laughter was brittle, mean, echoing in the narrow space. Beckett's face was turned fully to the camera, his smirk unguarded. When the video ended, silence crashed down over the hallway like a dropped curtain. Even the usual background noise of distant chatter and slamming lockers seemed to have vanished. Then, the heavy double doors at the far end of the hallway swung open. The sound was so sudden that several students jumped. Officer Maya stepped inside. She was still in her duty jacket, the dark fabric absorbing the fluorescent light, her presence immediately commanding. Her eyes swept the scene. Harlow, Ramirez, Miss Syme, Langford, the crowd, and finally Beckett. "What is going on?" she asked, but her tone carried the authority of someone who already suspected the answer. Ramirez gestured toward Harlow. "She has been showing us a compilation of harassment incidents, multiple dates, multiple victims." Maya's gaze shifted to Harlow. "Do you have those files stored securely?" "Yes," Harlow replied. Her voice did not waver, though her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might shake her ribs apart. "They are backed up, time-stamped." "Good," Maya said. Then she turned to the hallway at large. "This area is now part of an active investigation. No one enters or leaves without my direction." Her voice was steady, almost too calm, the kind of calm that carries the weight of law. A few students murmured, unsure whether to stay or scatter. Maya cut through their uncertainty with a single, clipped sentence. "Everyone not directly involved, step back to the designated line." She pointed to the edge of the hallway, where a strip of yellow paint marked the fire evacuation boundary. Ramirez began guiding the crowd backward. Miss Langford crossed her arms, staying close to Harlow as though shielding her from the residual hostility radiating from Beckett. Beckett muttered something under his breath. It might have been defiance, it might have been a curse. But when Maya's eyes locked on his, whatever words he had left tangled in his throat. Inside, Harlow felt a tremor of something she could not quite name. It was not victory, it was not relief. It was the strange, heavy knowledge that the moment she had been pushing toward for months had finally arrived, and that it would change everything, for everyone, in ways she could not yet see. The hallway's hum resumed, quieter now, like the air before a storm. Maya took Harlow's phone carefully, slipping it into an evidence bag with practiced precision. "You will get this back," she said, "but for now it needs to be logged." Harlow nodded. She kept her eyes on the clear plastic, watching her proof sealed away, as though locking a part of herself inside it. "Mr. Beckett," Maya continued, "you will remain here until we can review these files in full. Your parents will be contacted. I suggest you say nothing until they arrive." Beckett's face flushed, a deep red that crept up his neck. For the first time, his voice was quiet. "This is not over." Harlow met his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the noise of the hallway fell away again. She did not speak. She did not need to. The clips had spoken for her. Maya turned back to Ramirez. "Clear the rest of the students, secure the immediate area, and get statements from any witnesses willing to speak now." "And?" "Yes, officer," Ramirez replied. As the crowd began to disperse under Ramirez's guidance, Harlow felt the weight of dozens of eyes lingering on her. Some carried sympathy, others, doubt. A few, quiet admiration. But all of them now knew a part of the truth, and truth, once seen, could not be unseen. Morning arrived without softness. The building seemed to breathe in short, careful draws, as if the walls themselves were bracing. What followed was not the thunder of spectacle, but the slow machinery of process. It began with questions. A guidance aide led students one by one into a small conference room near the main office. The camera on the table's edge blinked its red light. The microphone drank each hesitant sentence. Harlow described what she had filmed across months. Her voice even, her hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles paled. "Miss..." Langford identified places, dates, the brittle laughter in a stairwell, the way a freshman's shoulders collapse when cornered. Officer Ramirez spoke to procedure, to where he stood when the cafeteria erupted and how quickly he moved. Each account added a narrow beam to a scaffold of truth. Between interviews, the lens turned to Kira. In the nurse's office, she sat with an elastic bandage wrapped around her knee, a neat oval of ice secured by a towel. The nurse's soft instructions, elevate, rest, breathe, carried the lilt of an incantation. Kira nodded, grateful for the ordinary kindness of being told to take care. When the room emptied, she called her father. The phone rang twice, then his voice arrived, steady as a hand extended in the dark. "Tell me where you are," he said. "In the nurse's office," she answered. "They are taking statements." "It is quiet in here." "Good," he said. "Then listen. You will be tempted to relive every frame. You do not need to. Say what happened once and say it clearly. Trust the record you have built." "I hear you," she said. "And Kira," he added, softer now, "remember what you carry. You did not enter a fight. You set a boundary. You enforced it when it was broken. That is not violence. That is survival." The words settled like warm stones. She closed her eyes, letting them weight her breathing into something slow and regular. Outside the door, the school murmured, as if from a long distance. Footsteps, a stapler, a bell that marked the change of period, as if anything could be changed by the ringing of a bell. By early afternoon, the clerical rhythm hardened into form. A notice arrived on official letterhead. A Title IX hearing and an internal board review had been scheduled for late day. The language was formal, cool as glass. The location: a windowless meeting room down the administrative corridor, where decisions were usually made about budgets and paint colors, now repurposed for something more intimate and more dangerous. Kira walked there beside a woman she had only met by phone. Avery Cole, counsel for the teachers' union. Avery was compact, composed, her hair pulled back, her suit a dark and quiet blue. She carried a thin folder and the particular calm of someone who has stood in many rooms where reputations are weighed against risk. "Two things," Avery said as they walked. "First, you will not perform your innocence. You will narrate it. Second, if anyone asks you to speculate about motive, you will not. You will return to what you saw, what you said, and what you did." Kira nodded. "I understand." The hearing room held a long table and the end-of-day smell of coffee gone cold. At one side sat the Title IX coordinator, a meticulous woman with a legal pad and a skeptical pen. Beside her, the district's counsel reviewed a binder thick with policy. Mr. Sir, Ellison occupied a chair near the corner, his expression drawn into neutrality so tight it looked like pain. Officer Maya stood against the back wall, present as an observer, her attention sharpened but still. A recorder on the table clicked. Names were announced for the record. The room accepted the weight of what they meant to do. The coordinator began, Miss Holt, we will hear your account of the cafeteria incident and of the events preceding it that you deem relevant to your safety and to your employment. After that, we will ask questions. Kira folded her hands. She told it once. She described the approach, her verbal boundary, the touch she had denied permission to receive, the parry, the sidekick to the hip, her step back, her request for security. She did not insist. She did not embellish. When she was done, she added, I reviewed the district policy on physical intervention. It allows minimum necessary force to prevent or end physical contact. That is what I applied. The district counsel spoke first, tone cool. Miss Holt, you are a trained martial artist. Would you agree that training confers advantage? Training confers control, Kira said. It allowed me to choose the least harmful option. I used my training to create distance, not damage. Could you have walked away? Counsel asked. I attempted to, Kira replied. I stepped back and stated my boundary. He closed the distance again. Could you have called for assistance sooner? I did, immediately after creating space. Avery's pen tapped once against her folder. For the record, she said evenly, the policy prioritizes verbal de-escalation and disengagement. My client employed both. When those failed, she used a single targeted movement designed to disrupt balance. The student recovered and remained standing within moments. There is no medical record of injury. There is a record of harassment. The coordinator turned to Harlow, who had been seated quietly along the wall. You provided several clips. Yes, Harlow said. I recorded them over months because I believed someone would need to see them all together. Oh, you understand that distributing such recordings can violate privacy policies, the coordinator said. I did not distribute them, Harlow answered. I preserved them. When asked, I provided them to Officer Maya. Maya stepped forward at the invitation of silence. Chain of custody is intact, she said. Files are preserved with metadata and copies created. We are treating them as evidence in a potential criminal investigation. The phrase landed with a muted thud. Mr. Ellison's fingers tightened around the edge of his chair. He looked older in that moment, as if the years had accelerated in the space between clips and policy. Questions continued. Slow, procedural, each one seeking a place to settle. Did Kira feel in danger? Yes. She felt her boundary had been crossed and was about to be crossed again. Why did she kick the hip rather than retreat further? Because she had already retreated once and was being closed upon. The hip allowed her to create space without risking the head or neck. Did she intend harm? Did she intend distance? Yes. Avery spoke sparingly, but each time her voice entered, it steadied the table. When district counsel suggested that a teacher's image was the school's image, Avery replied, a teacher's safety is the school's responsibility. When the coordinator wondered aloud whether the viral nature of student recordings risked reputational harm, Avery answered, reputation does not precede reality, it follows it. At last, the coordinator asked everyone to step out while the board conferred. The hallway outside the room was empty, a clean strip of tile and humming light. Kira leaned her shoulder against the wall and looked at nothing. Avery stood beside her, not speaking. Some silences do not want company, they want witness. Minutes stretched. A door opened somewhere far away and closed with a soft click. Footsteps approached and passed. Kira became acutely aware of the bandage beneath her skirt, the dull ache blooming and fading as if the knee were breathing. The door opened. They returned to their seats. The coordinator folded her hands. Ms. Holt, the board has reached a decision regarding the internal matter. Based on testimony, policy, and corroborating video evidence, we find that your use of physical force met the standard of minimum necessary intervention to end unlawful contact. You will return to your classroom without disciplinary action. As a condition of continued employment, you will participate in a district-led conflict management and de-escalation training. The district will also review supervision practices in common spaces. This hearing is concluded for the internal record. And the room exhaled, though no one made a sound. Mr. Ellison closed his eyes for a heartbeat and then opened them, the tightness in his face softening into something almost human. Kira nodded. She did not allow relief to loosen her composure, but she felt a small, deep sound in her chest, as if a string pulled too taut had finally eased a fraction. Maya remained where she was. While the internal matter is resolved, she said, the criminal investigation proceeds. We are filing requests for additional footage from the cafeteria and hallways. We will take statements from identified victims and witnesses. Mr. Vance has been advised of his rights. His parents have been contacted. I expect to confer with the district attorney by the end of the week. No one argued with the inevitability in her tone. Outside, late light had turned the windows of the corridor into panels of gold. Kira stepped into that light as if stepping from one room of her life into another. In the distance, she heard the rolling cart of a custodian, the soft murmur of a copier, small sounds of a school returning to its daily pulse. Avery touched her elbow, a brief, professional kindness. You did well, she said. I did what I could, Kira answered. Sometimes that is the same thing, Avery replied. They parted at the main office. Kira walked alone toward the west exit. The bandage tugged against her skin with each step, a reminder that bodies keep score even when minds refuse to. Outside, the air smelled faintly of rain that had not yet arrived. She called her father again, not because she needed instruction, but because the voice that had steadied her for years felt like a threshold she wanted to cross with him present, even through a line of wire and sky. It is done for now, she said. And you? He asked. I am upright, she said. I am going back to class. Then the world is already a fraction better, he said. Rest when you can. And remember, she finished the sentence with him, both of them speaking the words together, a quiet vow across the distance. Violence is the last resort. And when it comes, he added, be ready. She ended the call and stood for a moment beneath the slow-turning clouds. The investigation would move forward with its own gravity. The hearing had set a small stone on the side of the scale where she stood. Tomorrow there would be lesson plans, attendance sheets, and the wide-open eyes of young people who would decide for themselves what to carry from this. She would meet them where they were. She turned toward the parking lot, the bandage firm, the steps even, the day's verdict folded carefully into the quiet certainty of her breath. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished oak and cold stone, the kind of place where history weighed in the air like an unspoken verdict. Morning light streamed through tall windows, falling in golden rectangles across the floor. Rows of benches filled quickly, families of victims, reporters scribbling in tight shorthand, community members who had followed the case from its earliest whispers. Jayla sat near the back, hands clasped in her lap, the silver bracelet her grandmother had given her resting cool against her skin. She could feel her pulse in her wrists, every beat louder than the shuffle of shoes and low murmurs. Across the aisle, her mother sat stiffly, chin high, eyes locked on the space where Beckett would soon appear. There was no forgiveness in that gaze, only the quiet, unyielding strength of someone who had carried wounds too deep for words. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. All rise. Everyone stood. The judge entered, his robe trailing like a shadow. Moments later, Beckett was led in. His hands were bound loosely in front of him, his orange jumpsuit stark against the solemn wood paneling. The boy who had once swaggered through school hallways now walked with measured steps, shoulders slightly hunched. He kept his eyes on the floor until the guards guided him to his seat. The prosecution wasted no time. They called the first witness, a quiet, wiry boy with glasses who had once been shoved into a locker so violently he could not breathe. His voice trembled as he recounted the incident, but he did not falter. Then came a girl who had endured months of whispered threats, her testimony unfolding like torn pages from a diary. Each account was punctuated by still frames from the security footage, each image more damning than the last. But it was the digital evidence that tightened the air in the room to a suffocating pressure. The prosecutor played the clips on a large monitor, grainy videos from phones, captured from different angles. Beckett's voice could be heard, sharp, mocking, followed by the thud of impact, the startled gasps, the laughter of those around him. Even the judge's jaw seemed to tighten as the final clip froze on the screen. A still of Jayla standing, resolute, while Beckett stumbled back, the moment his power had cracked in front of everyone. Beckett did not look at the footage. Instead, he sat very still, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him, as if staring at the wood grain might erase the sound of his own voice echoing through the speakers. Between witness testimonies, there were moments, small, almost imperceptible beats, when the courtroom's rhythm shifted. During a recess, Beckett sat with a court-appointed psychologist at the corner table. Their voices were low, almost drowned out by the hum of people standing and stretching, but the psychologist leaned in with patience, nodding slowly. Beckett's hands, restless at first, stilled as he spoke. Later, Harlow took the seat beside him. They did not speak for long, but the few words Beckett managed seemed to hang between them like fragile glass. "It was never just about me," Beckett whispered, barely audible. Harlow's reply was softer still. "I know, but you still made the choice." The prosecution's closing argument was methodical, a chain of iron links: testimony, footage, forensic analysis of phone messages and group chats that left no doubt about coordination and intent. The defense attempted to paint a picture of a boy trapped beneath the shadow of a domineering father, pressured to maintain a reputation he did not fully own. But the truth was too heavy to be lifted by sympathy alone. When the time came for the verdict, the silence in the room felt like the pause before a thunderclap. The judge's voice was steady, but each word landed with the weight of stone. Guilty on multiple counts of assault, harassment, and intimidation. The sentencing followed: a term in a juvenile correction facility, mandatory counseling, and restrictions that would follow him long after release. Beckett's face barely changed, but his fingers gripped the edge of the table until the knuckles whitened. Somewhere in the crowd, a camera clicked. The sound was sharp, final. Afterward, there was an opportunity, optional, not required, for victims to meet Beckett in a private room under supervision. Jayla stood near the hallway, her mother at her side. She could hear the muffled voices of others considering whether to go in. Some chose to face him, others walked away. When Beckett's eyes lifted briefly to scan the doorway, Jayla knew he saw the absence as clearly as he saw the presence. Two of the younger victims did not step forward. One girl shook her head before leaving, her father's hand steady on her shoulder. It was not a gesture of cruelty. It was the refusal to grant a moment he had not yet earned. The air in that hallway was not warm with closure. It was cool, edged with boundaries that had been fought for and would be protected. Jayla's turn came, but she did not walk in. Instead, she stood by the tall window at the end of the corridor, looking out at the leafless trees swaying in the winter wind. The glass was cold beneath her fingertips. Somewhere behind her, the door to the meeting room clicked shut. A voice, a reporter perhaps, asked if she felt justice had been served. Jayla turned slightly, the light catching in her eyes. "Justice is not a single day," she said quietly. "It is what comes after." She walked toward the exit, the weight in her chest not lighter, but different, shaped into something she could carry. Outside, the afternoon sun fell in fractured beams across the courthouse steps. The crowd dispersed slowly, conversations trailing into the open air. Beckett's fate was sealed for now, but the echo of everything that had led to this day would not vanish with a sentence. As Jayla descended the steps, her mother fell into stride beside her. There were no words, none were needed. The rhythm of their footsteps was enough, a steady, unbroken beat in a world that had tried and failed to silence it. Spring arrived as a quiet promise rather than a declaration. The wind off the hills softened, and the long panes of the gymnasium windows admitted a gentler light. Months had passed since the courthouse verdict, and Redwood Valley High had learned to breathe again, not with forgetfulness, but with a steadier rhythm. The school issued a small announcement on its website about new safety initiatives and bystander training. It was an understated paragraph that felt, to those who had lived the story, like a small door opening. On a Saturday morning, the gym moved from silence into purpose. Folding chairs stood in careful rows along the sideline. Mats ran in a ribbon of blue across the polished floor. A portable projector sent a rectangle of pale light onto a white screen where a title faded in: Community Self, Defense, and History Lab. Beneath it, 3 lines appeared, simple and direct. Voice, space, exit. Kira Holt crossed the gym with a clipboard tucked against her hip. She had completed the district's conflict management course and then rewritten her own curriculum, weaving de-escalation, Title IX principles, and the geometry of safe disengagement into an hour that would be both lesson and rehearsal. Her knee still carried a memory of that day, a soreness that arrived like weather, but her stride was even. She directed the custodians where to place water coolers, checked the med kit, and breathed the way the studio had taught her, slow and measured until the heartbeat in her throat moved back into her chest. Harlow Bennett stood near the sign-in table, greeting families as they entered. The girl had shed the guardedness that once wrapped her like a cloak. She was careful still, but the caution was now choice, not reflex. Her name tag read, Assistant, and the word fit. She carried the attendance sheet with the seriousness of a baton. When a mother hesitated at the doorway, Harlow stepped forward and spoke with a patience that pierced hesitation without force. People listened to her because her voice held the authority of someone who had crossed a bridge and remembered exactly how it moved under her feet. The bleachers filled with faces familiar and new. Some were students from Kira's classes, some were younger siblings, some were neighbors who had watched the story unfold in headlines and whispers and now wanted to learn something they could hold. Officer Maya arrived in plain clothes and took a seat in the back row, her quiet attention settling over the room like a watchful hand. Even Mr. Ellison came, not as an administrator, but as a man who knew the school's halls had seen too much silence. He stood near the door, eyes moving over the gathered crowd with a solemn gratitude. Kira began where she always began, with a story. The projector shifted to a photograph of a bus filled with determined faces from an earlier decade. She spoke about sit-ins and freedom rides, about the grammar of nonviolent resistance, about the way bodies shape public space and meaning. She moved from history to law in a patient line, what Title IX promises, what it requires, what it allows when words fail and safety is at stake. Then she stepped onto the mat and asked everyone to stand. 3 sentences, she said, her voice firm enough to carry to the highest bleacher. Say them so that a person across a noisy room will hear them, and so that you will believe yourself when you say them. 1. Step back. You are too close. 2. Do not touch me. 3. I am leaving now. They spoke the words together, testing them against the size of the room. The echoes came back altered, not louder, but more certain, as if the building itself wished to remember them. Harlow moved among the pairs, demonstrating the frame, hands open, forearms building a barrier without aggression. She corrected angles with a respectful touch to a shoulder or a gentle adjustment of stance. When one boy turned the movement into a flourish, she shook her head slightly, an almost smile, and showed him the line again. This is not about winning a fight, she said. This is about going home. Kira demonstrated the parry, palm to forearm, a quick redirection that carried a different kind of authority than a shove. She followed with a side kick to the hip, precise and compact. Target for balance, not for pain, she said. You are stealing space, not breaking a body. The kick made a clean sound against the padded shield, a punctuation mark rather than a shout. She linked it to the exit, step back, angle off, eyes up, people, light. The hour found its cadence, words braided with motion, history braided with breath. The gym that once carried the shriek of whistles now held a different music. Feet sliding, voices repeating, water bottles opening, the collective murmur of people choosing something steadier than fear. There were laughs when a movement went clumsy. There were nods when a posture found its form. There were faces softening when a parent and a child discovered they could make a path for one another. Between drills, Kira saw Officer Maya wipe her eyes in a brief, private gesture. Mr. Ellison clapped at the end of a sequence and then stopped himself, a little surprised by his own hands. Harlow moved like a metronome, reliable as breath, and the room took its cue from her. During the short break, a volunteer from the community center wheeled in a cart stacked with paper cups and oranges. A local business had donated the mats. A retired teacher had brought a box of paperbacks on civil rights leaders and placed them near the exit with a handwritten sign, "Borrow freely, return when you can." Support did not arrive as a banner. It arrived as small, deliberate gestures that together felt like a ground underfoot. When the class ended, the applause rose not like a roar, but like standing water catching light. People lingered, they asked questions. They practiced one more time before gathering their jackets. Harlow collected attendance sheets that now felt more like a ledger of a village. In the hallway outside the gym, the mail cart waited against the wall. The receptionist hurried in, breathless, an envelope in her hand. "For you," she said to Kira. It was forwarded from the district office. Oh. The envelope was plain. Inside was a letter in careful handwriting. The first sentence apologized without decoration. The second admitted harm. The third did not ask for absolution. It said only this: "I am in a program where older youths teach anger management to younger ones. I tell my story without excuse. I try to name the places where I chose to be cruel. I understand if you do not respond." Kira stood with the letter and felt the complicated weight of it. Sincere, insufficient, necessary, incomplete. She thought of the victims who had chosen not to meet him. She honored their boundary as if it were a law. She folded the letter along its creases and placed it in a file that bore no label, only the date. When she returned to the gym for the final remarks, the room was still full. The projector had been shut off. The mats lay like calm water. Kira walked to the whiteboard on the rolling stand and picked up a black marker. The words she wrote belonged to her father, but they had become something the room now owned together. "Violence is the last resort, but when it comes, be ready." She capped the pen and stepped aside. The sentence remained. It did not point toward combat. It pointed toward courage shaped by restraint, toward the discipline of boundaries held with clarity, toward the steady insistence on dignity. "Run it once more," she said. Harlow raised the pad and the pairs resumed. Voice, frame, redirect, sidekick to the hip, exit. The movements looked almost like a dance now, the kind that refuses spectacle and chooses safety. In the back row, a girl who had watched from the bleachers during the first half stood and joined the line, her mother rising beside her. The camera pulls back in the mind's eye. The frame widens. The white words on the board hold their ground. The mats fill with students and parents, teachers and officers, the simply curious and the quietly resolved. There is no music, only the rhythm of preparation. There is no triumph, only the patient certainty of people who have decided to be ready. The room grows smaller in the distance, and still the lesson continues. The final echoes of laughter faded from the room as the students gathered their things, the chalk words still bright on the board. "Violence is the last resort, but when it comes, be ready." Kira stood beside it, her gaze lingering on the sentence as though it were more than her father's voice from the past. It was a compass, pointing to the place where strength and restraint must meet. Outside the open windows, the late afternoon sun spilled across the worn gym floor, catching the dust motes in golden light. Harlow stacked the practice mats quietly, her hands moving with the care of someone tending to something precious. Around them, the air still carried the charged hum of a story that had been lived, survived, and now shared. What happened months ago was not just about a single confrontation. It was about the space between what we endure and how we respond. It was about the unseen moments when someone stands alone in a hallway, deciding whether to bow their head or lift it. And it was about the ripple that starts with one act of courage, small at first, until it moves through an entire community, changing the way people see each other. Beckett's letter lay folded in Kira's bag, the ink already soft from the many times she had opened it. In his words, there was no erasing the harm done, but there was a spark of someone willing to step into the long, hard work of repair. That too was part of the lesson. Change rarely comes in a single burst. More often, it is the steady work of showing up, again and again, even when it is easier to turn away. Kira turned back to the students, some shy, some restless, all of them holding more strength than they yet knew. She saw herself in them. She saw the choice they would face in moments when the world tested their dignity. And she understood that what they carried from here was not just technique, but a sense of belonging to something larger. The belief that standing up for what is right is worth the risk. The camera of the mind's eye could have stayed there forever, on the chalkboard, on the gathered class. But it begins to pull back. The view widens. The sound of voices grows softer until it blends with the heartbeat of the town itself. Somewhere in that quiet is an unspoken invitation to listen, to speak, to act when the time comes. And as this chapter closes, the story does not end. It continues in the choices we make, in the way we treat the people beside us. If this journey has moved you, share the moment. Speak your thoughts. Join the conversation. Because change is not the work of one person. It is the echo of many voices, carrying forward what matters most.